In the heart of a bustling airport terminal, a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company steps onto her private jet. Her calm demeanor is a stark contrast to the chaos of the world around her. She's dressed simply, without the gold and diamonds that one might expect from someone in her position. She doesn't need the display of wealth. As she approaches the gate, a flight attendant's cold eyes scan her, immediately making an assumption. "You don't belong here," the attendant sneers. The words hit her like a slap, but it's not the first time. She's heard it all before. But today, things will be different. Today, she will turn the tables. Keep watching, because what happens next will leave you stunned. Moments after this humiliation, she will change the fate of an entire airline. Stick around to see how she pulls off the unthinkable. CTA, before we dive into the full story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a like if you believe that no one should be judged by their appearance. The atmosphere in the terminal had shifted, the cold glare of the flight attendants had intensified, and the entire interaction felt increasingly hostile. The CEO, Vanessa Clark, had just been humiliated in front of dozens of people by an airline staff who had dared to question her place in the first-class cabin. She remained calm, unshaken, her eyes focused not on the absurdity of the situation, but on the bigger picture. The words that had been spoken, "You don't belong here," had struck a nerve. But this was far from the first time she had faced discrimination. She had risen above such slights for years, but this moment, this particular humiliation, would be different. She would make sure of it. As the attendants continued to look at her with thinly veiled contempt, Vanessa felt a rush of anger, but she kept it contained. She'd learned long ago that real power didn't need to scream. It just needed to be steady, unmovable. The CEO of Summit Enterprises wasn't about to let a few small-minded individuals control her narrative. Vanessa stood in front of the gate, the sounds of passengers boarding around her, but it felt as though she was in a vacuum, the world around her falling into silence. Her phone buzzed. She answered immediately, her voice still calm. "Prepare the withdrawal. It's time." On the other end of the line, her assistant, Carla Evans, responded without hesitation, "Understood, ma'am. It's already in motion." The moment had come. Vanessa had given the airline more than enough chances. But the blatant racism, the assumption that she didn't belong simply because of her appearance, was the final straw. It wasn't about the plane, or the seat, or even the staff. It was about respect. And this airline, with its centuries-old traditions and institutional biases, had shown none. As Carla continued to update her on the status of the withdrawal, Vanessa's gaze swept across the terminal. The flight attendants were still standing at the counter, whispering among themselves, clearly underestimating her. It was almost laughable. Vanessa's investments, her leadership, her expertise, everything she had built, was worth more than this petty interaction. But she wouldn't just walk away from this. No. Today she was going to take back what was rightfully hers, and more. She knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger. She wasn't going to be the only one to suffer because of their ignorance. As she looked out over the terminal, Vanessa's mind was already in motion, calculating the repercussions of what was about to unfold. She wasn't just withdrawing funds. She was going to dismantle this entire establishment. She had the power to do it, and more importantly, the resolve to see it through. "I want every penny, Carla," Vanessa said, her voice firm. "Make sure they feel this. Withdraw the full amount, and make sure it's known. No more deals, no more favors. This is where it ends." As Carla confirmed the transaction, Vanessa's heart raced, not from fear or excitement, but from the realization that this moment would echo through the business world. She was about to make a statement that no one would soon forget. She glanced toward the gate again, where the flight attendants were still oblivious to the impending storm. Their words had already sealed their fate. "Don't worry, Vanessa," Carla reassured her. "The funds are being pulled. They won't know what hit them." Vanessa nodded slowly, already taking the next step in her mind. It wasn't just the $4 billion she was pulling, it was the message that she was sending. The silence around her now felt different. The sting of the insult had been replaced with the clarity of purpose. She was no longer a passive player in this scenario. She was the one writing the rules. As the boarding process continued, Vanessa took a slow, measured step forward. She had been doubted, judged, and dismissed far too many times in her life, but she was done being silenced. The moment she stepped onto that plane, She would be reminded of exactly who she was and what she could do. The staff would see her not just as a passenger, but as the powerful woman she was. A woman who built her empire with her own two hands, without needing anyone's approval or validation. The crowd that had once been an anonymous sea of faces now felt like witnesses to history. Vanessa knew that this moment was bigger than the flight, bigger than the airline. This was about showing the world that no one, not even an airline that thought they could deny her place in first class, could stop her from taking what was rightfully hers. And as she finally moved to board, she felt an overwhelming sense of justice, not because she had won this battle, but because she was about to win the war. She stepped onto the plane, holding her head high, knowing that this wasn't just the end of an insult. It was the beginning of something far more significant. The airline would never be the same, and neither would the people who had mistreated her. Vanessa didn't need to say a word. The withdrawal had already begun, and the ripple effect of her decision would be felt by the staff, the passengers, and the entire industry. This was just the beginning, and Vanessa Clark was no longer just a CEO. She was a force to be reckoned with. The system that had long oppressed her was about to crumble, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Vanessa Clark walked down the narrow aisle of the plane, her steps steady and deliberate, each one echoing in the quiet cabin. The flight attendants, still unaware of the storm they had just unleashed, stood frozen by the door, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had assumed that the black woman who had walked into their first-class cabin was just another passenger trying to scam her way into a seat she didn't belong in. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. She wasn't just another passenger. Vanessa Clark was the owner of Summit Enterprises, a conglomerate that controlled billions in assets, including the very airline that now stood on the brink of losing everything. As she made her way to her seat, she glanced back over her shoulder. The flight attendants were still standing there, caught in the web of their own ignorance. They had made the fatal mistake of underestimating her, of assuming she didn't belong. But they were about to learn exactly who Vanessa was, and what she was capable of. She slid into her seat, the familiar leather comfort wrapping around her like a cloak of power, her back straight, and her eyes focused ahead. She didn't need to say a word. The silence in the cabin was already speaking louder than any words could. The moment she had been waiting for had arrived. She was no longer just a passenger on this flight. She was the storm that would bring down this airline, piece by piece. Her phone buzzed once again. The message from Carla confirming what Vanessa already knew. The withdrawal was complete. The $4 billion had been pulled, and with it, the foundation of the airline began to crumble. The airline's board was in a frenzy, their emergency calls flooding Vanessa's assistant's phone. Carla remained calm, as always, executing the plan with precision. They're in panic mode. Carla's voice crackled through the phone. The media's already starting to catch wind of the story. You've made a move that will shake the industry. Vanessa nodded, her eyes narrowing with focus. Good, she said softly. Let them talk. Let them wonder. But this is just the beginning. I won't stop until every person in that airline who thought they could disrespect me knows exactly what happens when you mess with the wrong person. The flight continued on its course, but for Vanessa, it was no longer just a flight to her next destination. It was a symbol, a moving stage for the revolution she was about to lead. A few passengers glanced at her as they passed, noticing the calm aura around her, sensing the quiet power she exuded. They had no idea who she was, but something about her presence left them unsettled. She wasn't just a woman sitting quietly in a seat. She was the force that would dismantle the system that had tried to silence her. One of the passengers, a young man seated a few rows ahead, leaned over to his companion and whispered, "She's got to be somebody important. You can feel the energy around her." His companion nodded, but neither of them dared to ask. They could feel it, just like the flight attendants had. Vanessa Clark was not someone to be underestimated. It wasn't just about the money. It was about power, respect, and justice. She had been underestimated her whole life, from her humble beginnings to the heights of business she had climbed. But now, standing in that plane, she was the embodiment of everything they had tried to suppress. As the plane soared through the skies, Vanessa's mind was already working, calculating her next move. The airline had made a critical mistake by trying to dehumanize her, to turn her into just another black woman who didn't fit their idea of what a first-class passenger should be. But they had underestimated her resilience, her intelligence, and her unyielding determination to succeed. And now they were going to pay the price. The CEO had a reputation for making decisions that reverberated across industries. But this time, she wasn't just going to change one company. She was going to change the entire way people viewed Black executives, Black women, and the business world as a whole. This wasn't about a single company. This was about sending a message that would be heard loud and clear. As the plane cruised along, she sat back, feeling the quiet strength building inside her. The message had been sent, and now it was only a matter of time before the world felt the impact. Carla's voice broke through her thoughts once again. Vanessa, the board is requesting an emergency meeting. They're begging for a chance to make it right. Vanessa smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. Tell them to keep begging. They've lost their chance to make it right. She ended the call and looked out the window. The sky was clear, but below, the world was about to change. She wasn't just sitting in a seat. She was sitting on the precipice of something much bigger. The fight for justice, for equality, was never easy. But Vanessa had never been one to back down. And now, as she sat in that plane, she knew that the moment of reckoning was just beginning. She would take this airline down, not with violence, but with the force of her will and the undeniable truth that no one should ever be judged or dismissed based on the color of their skin. The moment the plane landed, the story would break. The media would be all over it, and the world would know exactly what happened when a Black CEO was pushed too far. And for the airline, it would be the beginning of the end. As the plane descended toward its destination, Vanessa Clark leaned back in her seat, her fingers tracing the cool edge of the armrest, a subtle but deliberate gesture of control. Her mind was far from the peaceful skies outside the window. It was focused on the fallout that was about to hit the airline and the powerful message she was sending to the corporate world. The turbulence in the sky had nothing on the storm brewing below. She had already pulled the $4 billion in investments, but she knew that the real battle was about to begin. The moment the plane touched down, the world would know exactly what had happened when they underestimated her. She wasn't just a CEO, she was a force to be reckoned with, and everyone who had dared to humiliate her would soon understand that. The flight attendants, still oblivious to the storm they had triggered, continued their duties, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. They had no idea that their actions, their assumptions about her based on her appearance, had set off a chain of events that would bring down an empire. Vanessa's phone buzzed again. It was Carla, her assistant, whose voice came through the speaker with calm efficiency. Vanessa, the media is starting to pick up the story. There's already chatter on social media. It's getting bigger. Good, Vanessa replied, her voice steady. Let them talk. Let them see what happens when you mess with the wrong person. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of the action she had set in motion. She wasn't done. She hadn't even started yet. The moment the plane landed, she would make her next move. The media was already speculating, trying to piece together the story of a Black CEO who had been disrespected and had pulled her funding from the airline. They had no idea what was really coming. Vanessa was not just a businesswoman. She was about to become the embodiment of justice for every person who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or humiliated because of their race or gender. As the plane touched down and the engines roared to a halt, Vanessa rose from her seat, her posture as poised and graceful as ever. She moved toward the exit, the flight attendants parting ways, their eyes still full of confusion and fear. The same flight attendants who had judged her were now powerless in the face of the storm she had unleashed. She stepped off the plane with quiet confidence, her heels clicking against the polished airport floor like a countdown to the inevitable. The moment she walked into the terminal, the media were waiting. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Vanessa kept her pace steady, unwavering. She wasn't here for their questions. She was here to take back control, to show the world the price of discrimination. Vanessa, what's next for the airline? One reporter asked, his voice eager. She didn't even pause as she responded, her voice clear and firm. What's next is accountability. What's next is a reckoning for the people who thought they could treat me, or anyone else, like that. She walked past the cameras, her head held high, but she knew that this was only the beginning. As she made her way to the car waiting outside, Carla called again, her voice more urgent now. Vanessa, we've confirmed. The airline's board members are scrambling. They're panicking. The money has been pulled. They're in full crisis mode. Good, Vanessa said, her lips curling into a small, satisfied smile. Let them panic. They should have thought about the consequences before they decided to treat me like an outsider in my own company. As she settled into the back seat of the car, she felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about respect, about making a statement that would echo through the business world for years to come. She wasn't just dismantling an airline. She was dismantling a system of discrimination that had existed for far too long. As the car sped through the city, Vanessa's phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. She opened it, and her eyes scanned the text. It was from the board of directors at the airline, begging for a meeting, offering apologies, and requesting a chance to make amends. But Vanessa wasn't interested in their apologies. She wasn't interested in their excuses. What had happened to her wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, a systemic issue that ran deeper than just one airline. Tell them no, she said, her voice calm but resolute. I'm not interested in their apologies. I'm interested in them understanding that this is what happens when you disrespect people, when you treat them as though they don't belong. This is about more than me. This is about every person they've ever hurt. As the meeting requests flooded her inbox, Vanessa knew she had already won. The airline, once a symbol of prestige and power, was now in full damage control mode. They had underestimated her, treated her like an intruder, and now they were about to face the consequences. But Vanessa was not just an individual fighting for her dignity. She was leading a revolution, one that would ripple through the corporate world and change the way people viewed Black CEOs, Black women, and the business world as a whole. The battle was far from over, but Vanessa knew one thing for sure. She had taken the first step in a fight that would leave a lasting mark on the corporate world. And it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been marginalized, overlooked, or dismissed. She was the embodiment of change, and the world was watching. Vanessa Clark stood at the center of the media storm, the cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions, but she didn't flinch. She had been the center of attention before, but this time it felt different. This time, it wasn't just about her. It was about making a statement that would ripple through the business world, that would challenge the system and demand accountability for every person who had ever been judged or dismissed based on the color of their skin. As she made her way through the crowd, the voices and questions of the press started to fade into the background. Vanessa was focused, her thoughts calculating her next steps with precision. She had no time for apologies or the desperate requests for meetings from the airline's board members. Those were just distractions. What mattered now was that the world understood what had happened here and why it mattered. She was about to make sure that no one would ever forget the moment when she, a Black woman, had been pushed too far and had taken back control of her narrative. As she entered the waiting car, Carla, her trusted assistant, immediately updated her on the situation. Vanessa, the airline is falling apart. The board members are calling in every favor they can, trying to save face, but it's too late. Media outlets are running with the story. The whole world is watching. Vanessa nodded, a small smile curling at the corner of her lips. Let them scramble, she said calmly. They're not going to fix this. The damage is done. They wanted to judge me, to make assumptions about who I was based on how I look, and now they are going to learn exactly what happens when you treat people like that. She sat back in the plush seat, her eyes focused on the road ahead, the city passing by in a blur. The gravity of the situation was settling in, but she wasn't about to let herself get distracted by the chaos. This was her moment, and she was going to make sure she used it to its fullest potential. What's next? Carla asked, her voice coming through the car's speaker, steady and businesslike, as always. Vanessa took a deep breath, her fingers lightly tapping the armrest. It's time to make the next move, she said, her tone sharp and filled with purpose. I'm not just going to withdraw my investments. This goes beyond that. I'm going to make sure they understand that this isn't just a financial hit. This is a shift. I want every single person who was complicit in this to feel the consequences. The system they've created, the discrimination they've allowed, will be dismantled, and it will start with me. Carla paused before responding. Are you sure about this? Going public with it all, it could be risky. Risky? Vanessa echoed, her voice unwavering. I've been taking risks my whole life. What's risky is letting them get away with it. What's risky is allowing companies like this to perpetuate racism and discrimination. What's risky is staying silent. I've had enough. The words hung in the air, a declaration of intent that couldn't be ignored. Vanessa Clark wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person who had been marginalized, for every woman of color who had been told they didn't belong, for every person who had been overlooked simply because of their appearance. She wasn't just a CEO anymore. She was a symbol of resistance. By the time the car reached her office, the media had already spread the story like wildfire. Social media was buzzing, hashtags were trending, and people from all over the world were showing their support. Some saw her as a hero, while others criticized her for making such a bold move, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that she had made her mark, and the world was paying attention. She stepped out of the car, the weight of the moment settling over her, but her resolve remained strong. As she entered the building, her team was already in place, ready for the next phase. Carla was waiting for her in the conference room, a folder full of documents in front of her. "Everything is ready," Carla said, her voice calm but with a hint of excitement. "The press release is drafted, and we have the legal documents prepared for the next phase." Vanessa nodded, taking a seat at the head of the table. "Let's do this," she said. "It's time for the world to see the truth. We're going to make sure that every investor, every company, and every employee who has ever faced this kind of discrimination knows that they're not alone. This is bigger than just one airline." Vanessa took a moment to glance at the papers in front of her. The legal team had already begun working on the next steps, filing formal complaints and preparing lawsuits for the companies that had been complicit in the racial discrimination. It was a multi-pronged approach, one that would ensure that the airline, and every other company with a similar culture, would be held accountable. As she looked up at her team, Vanessa's gaze was steady, her voice strong. "We will not stop until every person who has ever been mistreated by this system gets the justice they deserve. This is not just about the airline. This is about creating a world where people are valued for who they are, not what they look like. Where people are judged by their merit, not their skin color." The room was silent, but the energy in the air was palpable. Vanessa had just declared war on the system that had allowed racism to thrive in corporate America, and she wasn't backing down. As her assistant Carla finalized the paperwork, Vanessa stood up, her posture tall and proud. "I'm going to make sure that the world knows who I am, not for what I've built, but for the stand I've taken. This is just the beginning." The battle was far from over, but Vanessa was no longer just a bystander. She was the one making the rules now, and the world would have to listen. The next few days passed in a blur of activity, but Vanessa Clark remained focused. The media storm she had ignited had only intensified, with headlines popping up everywhere, each one carrying her name and the story of the black CEO who had pulled billions in investments from the airline after being disrespected. Some saw it as a powerful stand against systemic racism, others as a businesswoman making a bold move to protect her interests, but Vanessa knew that this was so much more than just a financial decision. This was a turning point, not just for her, but for anyone who had ever been treated as though they did not belong. She had made sure that her message would not be lost in the noise. The press release she had signed off on had been sent to every major outlet, and social media was buzzing with opinions, support, and backlash alike. But the one thing no one could ignore was the undeniable power of her actions. She had forced an industry, and perhaps the world, to sit up and take notice. She wasn't just a CEO anymore. She was a beacon of change, and the ripple effect of her decision was spreading. The next step was to take the fight to the very heart of the corporate world. Vanessa sat in her sleek, modern office, the walls lined with art and accomplishments from her years of hard work. The building she had helped build, the empire she had forged, she had come a long way from the days when she was told she didn't belong. Now, with everything at her fingertips, it was time to act decisively. Carla was already there, her ever-present calm demeanor a constant source of reassurance. "Vanessa, the board from the airline has requested another meeting," Carla said, her voice steady, but there was a glint of excitement in her eyes. "They are desperate to meet with you, to make things right. They're offering to reinstate your investments, to make changes to their diversity policies. They're pleading." Vanessa's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Tell them no," she replied, her tone firm. "I'm not interested in their apologies or their half-hearted offers. I want to see real change. I want them to understand the consequences of their actions. They have done nothing but perpetuate a system that devalues people like me, and now they will pay the price. Carla nodded, taking down the notes. Understood. The press is already running stories about their desperation. The public is listening. This is bigger than just the airline now. Vanessa sat back in her chair, her mind racing with the possibilities. This was no longer just about one airline. This was about reshaping how the corporate world viewed people like her. People who had fought their way to the top, only to be dismissed and underestimated because of their skin color. It was time to take that fight beyond one corporation, beyond one industry. It was time to make sure that no one else had to suffer in silence. It's time to start setting the precedent, Vanessa said, her voice calm but filled with authority. We need to go after the entire system. Not just the airline, but every institution that thinks they can treat people this way. We need to take back the power that they have been abusing for far too long. Carla glanced at the documents in front of her. You mean a full-scale campaign, not just against this airline, but against the broader industry? Vanessa nodded slowly. Yes, I want to send a message to every corporation, every industry, that the old way of doing things is over. If they don't want to change, we'll make them. I want to see accountability, and I want to see it now. The room was quiet for a moment as Carla absorbed the weight of the plan. I'll get the team on it. It's time to execute. Vanessa stood up from her desk, walking over to the window and gazing out at the city. The world was watching, and she was ready to make it listen. Her phone buzzed again. It was a notification from the social media team. Vanessa, the hashtag Justice for Vanessa Clark is trending worldwide. People are rallying behind you. A small smile played on her lips. Let them rally. This is just the beginning. As the days passed, Vanessa's message continued to spread. The airline, once a symbol of wealth and privilege, was now being torn apart by its own actions. Board members scrambled to save face, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and the public was demanding accountability. Vanessa had set a precedent, and the world was taking note. But her work was far from over. She had already begun pushing for legislative changes, calling on lawmakers to enact policies that would ensure fair treatment in the workplace and in public spaces for people of color. She had already started conversations with investors, urging them to reconsider their support for companies that perpetuated inequality. Vanessa was determined to make sure that the systemic issues she had faced were addressed on a larger scale. As the legal and corporate battles continued, Vanessa's resolve only grew stronger. She was not just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been silenced, ignored, or treated as less than. She wasn't just a CEO, she was a leader in the fight for justice. And she was just getting started. The weeks following Vanessa Clark's public stand were a whirlwind of media coverage, legal battles, and corporate shakeups. The world had taken notice, and as the dust began to settle, it was clear that what she had done had sparked a revolution, not just in the airline industry, but across the corporate world as a whole. Vanessa had shown that when a company mistreated the wrong person, the consequences could be devastating. The airline she had once invested billions in was now on the brink of collapse, and Vanessa was prepared to finish what she had started. As the legal team worked tirelessly to ensure that the airline would never again operate under such a biased system, Vanessa had begun setting her sights on broader, more systemic change. She had already spoken to lawmakers about introducing new diversity and inclusion regulations, but she wasn't going to stop there. Vanessa had a plan, one that would force the corporate world to evolve or be left behind. Her assistant, Carla, had become the nerve center of their operation, making sure that every move was executed with precision. Vanessa, we've just received an offer from the airline's competitors. They want to talk about a partnership now that their stock is plummeting and they're desperate for new investors, Carla reported one morning, her voice neutral but tinged with a hint of excitement. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing with interest. Tell them I'm not interested, she said firmly, her tone cold. They had their chance, and they blew it. Now they have to deal with the consequences of their actions. I don't want anything to do with them. Carla nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she drafted a response. Vanessa's rejection wasn't just personal, it was a statement to the entire industry. If they wanted her support, they would have to prove that they had learned something, that they were willing to change. But Vanessa wasn't holding her breath. As the days passed, more companies came forward, asking for meetings, offering deals, hoping to regain their lost reputation. Vanessa remained steadfast, knowing that her next move would be the most significant yet. She wasn't just going to settle for symbolic victories. She wanted to change the rules. She wanted to reshape corporate America from the inside out. One evening, as she sat in her office overlooking the city skyline, Vanessa received an unexpected call. It was from one of the largest private equity firms in the world, a firm she had done business with in the past, but one she had never fully trusted. "Vanessa," the voice on the other end of the phone said, smooth and persuasive. "We've been watching the fallout from your decision. We think you've made an impact, and we'd like to discuss a potential partnership. We have the power and resources to help you achieve your vision, to take this even further. We want to invest in your future." Vanessa paused for a moment, considering the offer. This was the kind of opportunity she had once dreamed of, the chance to build something even bigger, to have the resources to reshape an entire industry. But as the weight of the offer settled on her shoulders, she remembered why she had made her stand in the first place. It wasn't for the money. It was about justice. "I appreciate the offer," she said, her voice unwavering. "But I'm not interested in your resources. I'm interested in real change. If you're serious about that, we can talk. But if you think I'm going to sell out for a quick paycheck, you're mistaken." The line went silent for a beat before the voice on the other end responded. "I understand. You've made your position clear." Vanessa hung up the phone, a sense of satisfaction washing over her. She had learned long ago that power wasn't about the money or the prestige. It was about staying true to your values, even when the world tried to make you compromise. She wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how powerful, tell her what to do. Vanessa had a mission, and nothing was going to stop her from seeing it through. The following day, Vanessa met with a group of investors who had been supporting her vision from the start. They were eager to see what the next step in her plan would be, and Vanessa was ready to deliver. "It's time to expand," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We're not just going to change one industry. We're going to change the entire corporate structure. We will create a company that doesn't just talk about diversity and inclusion, but actually implements it. We're going to build something that proves businesses can thrive without discrimination, without bias. And we're going to lead the way." The investors, who had seen her vision from the beginning, nodded in agreement. They knew that with Vanessa's leadership, anything was possible. As the meeting ended, Carla handed Vanessa a folder with the latest reports. "Everything is set," Carla said, her voice filled with anticipation. "We have the green light to move forward with the next phase." Vanessa stood up from the table, a look of determination on her face. "Then let's do it," she said, her voice resolute. "We have a lot of work to do, and I'm not wasting any more time." As the days passed, and the plan began to take shape, Vanessa's influence grew. She wasn't just a CEO anymore. She was a leader, a changemaker, and a symbol of the future of business. The corporations that had once dismissed her, who had treated her as if she didn't belong, were now scrambling to catch up. Vanessa had proven that true power came not from wealth or status, but from the ability to challenge the system and create a new path. She had fought for herself, but now she was fighting for everyone who had ever been overlooked, for every person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And with every step she took, she was reshaping the future of corporate America. The momentum was building. Vanessa Clark could feel it in the air as she walked through the bustling streets of the city, her eyes fixed ahead with unwavering determination. The media coverage had intensified, and every article, every news segment, seemed to echo the same message. Vanessa was no longer just a businesswoman. She had become the face of a movement, a symbol of resistance against the systemic bias that ran deep within the corporate world. The conversations around her were shifting. People who had once dismissed her were now starting to listen, not just to her story, but to the undeniable power she had shown by taking back control of her investments, by refusing to let the world define her. But Vanessa wasn't about to stop there. She had already proven a point, but the war was far from over. There was more work to be done, and she wasn't going to rest until every corporation that perpetuated inequality would feel the weight of her actions. As she walked into her office, the glass doors sliding open with a soft click, Carla was already waiting for her, the look in her eyes a mix of anticipation and resolve. "Vanessa," Carla began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of everything that had happened in the last few weeks. We've been contacted by several organizations who want to partner with us. They want to help us push this forward. There's real momentum behind us now." Vanessa nodded, but her face remained serious. "What do they want?" she asked, her tone calm but sharp. "They want to make sure this doesn't end with the airline," Carla replied, pulling out a file and laying it on the desk. "They want to take your message global. They're talking about creating a new framework for diversity and inclusion in corporate America, something that goes beyond just talking the talk. They're ready to back it with resources, with influence." Vanessa looked down at the file, her fingers brushing over the neatly organized papers, but her mind was already elsewhere. She wasn't interested in half measures. She wasn't going to settle for just changing one company or one industry. She was going to change the system. "We're not here to build a diversity program," Vanessa said, her voice growing more resolute. "We're here to tear down the system that created the need for one. This isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about dismantling what's been built to keep people like me, people like us, out of the picture." Carla nodded, fully understanding the gravity of what Vanessa was saying. "So what's the next step?" "We go bigger," Vanessa said firmly. "We build a coalition. We get every company that claims to support diversity to put their money where their mouth is. I want action. I want policies that are not just about hiring diverse talent, but about empowering them to rise through the ranks, to have real influence in decision-making. We need accountability across the board. If they want to be a part of this, they need to prove they're serious. No more empty promises, no more token gestures." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her gaze unwavering. "We make them all understand. This is non-negotiable. If they want to be a part of the future, they need to align with what we're doing, or they will be left behind." Carla smiled, a rare look of admiration crossing her face. "I'll start reaching out to our partners and get this moving," she said, already typing away on her laptop. Vanessa stood up, walking to the window and looking out over the city. The skyline stretched before her, a symbol of all that she had built and all that she was about to tear down. She wasn't just making a stand anymore. She was setting the stage for something much larger. A future where people like her didn't just exist in the periphery, but were at the center, leading, shaping, and changing the very foundations of corporate power. The stakes had never been higher, but Vanessa felt a deep sense of purpose. This was her fight, and she would not back down. The media was buzzing, social media campaigns were gaining traction, and the corporate world was beginning to take note. Vanessa's actions had sparked a conversation that couldn't be ignored. She was no longer just a CEO, she was a trailblazer, a force to be reckoned with. But she knew that change wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time, it would take perseverance, and it would take allies who were just as committed to the cause. But one thing was for certain. Vanessa Clark was going to make sure the world never forgot what happened. When she was disrespected, when she was treated as if she didn't belong. The world was on the brink of a new era, and Vanessa was going to be the one to lead the charge. Weeks passed, and the ripple effect of Vanessa Clark's bold actions was still reverberating throughout the corporate world. The media coverage had calmed, but the conversation surrounding her name had not. Headlines had shifted from sensationalism to admiration, from outrage to understanding. Vanessa's actions had transcended the initial shock value and had begun to shape the narrative around what it meant to be a black woman in power. No longer just a CEO who had pulled billions from an airline. She had become a symbol of leadership, integrity, and relentless pursuit of justice. The corporate world had been forced to confront its biases, and no one could ignore the shift that had begun. As Vanessa sat in her office, looking over the latest reports, she knew the battle was far from over. But the foundations for change had been laid, and she was prepared for the long road ahead. She had been underestimated, belittled, and silenced for far too long. But now, she was in a position to change the very structure of corporate America. "Vanessa, we've been contacted by a few key players in the industry," Carla said as she entered the office, holding a stack of documents. "They want to know if we're ready to take this to the next level. They're asking about how they can join forces, create a unified front against discrimination in business." Vanessa turned in her chair, her eyes narrowing in thought. "It's about time," she replied, her voice firm, yet calm. "They had their chance to do the right thing, and now they see what happens when we stand up. We didn't wait for them to change, we made them change." Carla smiled slightly, impressed with her boss's determination. "Exactly," she said, setting the documents on the desk. "But what's next? Do we have a plan for the next phase?" Vanessa stood up from her chair and walked over to the window, looking out over the city. The sky was clear, but her mind was racing, calculating the next steps with precision. "We keep pushing," she said, her voice steady. "We don't settle for superficial changes or empty promises. If they want to be a part of this, they need to prove they're serious. We're not here to make them comfortable. We're here to make them accountable." The sound of her voice carried the weight of a woman who had fought to get where she was, and who had no intention of backing down. Carla nodded, absorbing every word. "And how do we make sure this movement goes beyond just one or two companies? How do we ensure real, systemic change?" Vanessa turned from the window, her eyes meeting Carla's with unyielding resolve. "We build a coalition. We gather the right allies. We get investors, politicians, and industry leaders who are willing to put their money and their influence behind this cause. We create a framework that forces companies to take accountability for their actions. This isn't just about making a statement. This is about creating lasting change." She paused for a moment, letting the words settle. "I want to see real diversity, real inclusion, and real representation in the boardrooms and executive offices. We need policies that go beyond the surface level. No more tokenism. No more empty commitments. If they want to stay relevant, they need to commit to change, real, measurable change." Carla took a deep breath, clearly impressed by Vanessa's clarity and vision. "I'll start reaching out to our contacts. We'll organize a summit, bring in the key players who are ready to make this a reality." Vanessa nodded, the spark of ambition igniting in her chest. "And when we do, we'll make sure the world knows. We'll make sure this isn't just a trend, but a movement that can't be ignored." The next few weeks were filled with nonstop work, meetings, phone calls, emails, and endless preparations for the summit that Vanessa had envisioned. It wasn't just about the airline anymore. It was about creating an entire network of companies that would operate under new principles that emphasized fairness, equality, and justice. When the summit day finally arrived, Vanessa stood at the front of the room, her presence commanding the attention of everyone there. Business leaders, investors, and policymakers were all in the room, listening intently as she outlined her vision. "This isn't just about diversity and inclusion," Vanessa began, her voice steady but passionate. "This is about creating a system where everyone, no matter their background, has the opportunity to rise to the top based on merit, not based on whether they fit a certain mold. This is about dismantling the systems that have allowed racism and discrimination to thrive. If we want to build a better future, we must start here, with us." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And if you're not ready to commit to real change, then we're not interested in doing business with you. This is the new standard, and if you're not willing to meet it, you can stay behind." The room was silent for a moment before one of the investors, a well-known philanthropist, stood up and applauded. Soon, the rest of the room joined in, a standing ovation for the woman who had single-handedly brought them all together to fight for something greater than profits. As the applause died down, Vanessa took a deep breath, her heart pounding with the realization that this was just the beginning. She had done it. She had changed the game, and now it was time to build the future she had always dreamed of. The world was watching, and Vanessa Clark was ready to lead it into a new era.